Hi, Jamie. Good to see you
Hi,
again.
good morning.
How are you?
Oh, I'm flooded, but I think we'll get into a bit of why.
Yeah, so this week I've kind of devoured all of your scripts, your essays. They've been really, I guess, so much to reflect on for me and so much that I relate to. So when we're thinking about how our education systems are set up and how it can feel that things are taught often in isolation, in fragments, in pieces across our education system, and how that can be really hard in terms of the classroom environment, the ecology of learning for our GLPs, for our autistic students. But I would go along and say, actually, anybody, that child or young person that I'm working with a communication need, be that DLD, be that they have sort of word finding needs or differences, that actually linking those bits up within the curriculum. So linking up the fact that, in when you're talking about maths and you've got vocabulary, actually there's a whole load of English in there. There's rich vocabulary. When we're thinking about biology, some of the language relates to what we're doing in English. And yet none of this feels within our education systems. And you're writing about the US. I immediately related to it and was thinking about it in terms of our own education system over here, that those that joined upness, and that opportunity to experience the concept, not the language, just the concept. And when we were talking about it, the pendulum, the the dye in the water, the you're going to have to help me here now. The seedling growing towards the light, but just
Yes.
experiencing, all those different things. And I was thinking, but this is not just our GLPs, these are all of our children that we support who have communication needs. And I think it was just, yeah, brilliant. I mean, buzzing. And I know I'd love for you to talk me through it more.
Hi. Well, and again, good morning. Um, so I am a special educator, right? Which means that I'm not an English teacher, I'm not a maths teacher, I'm not a science teacher, but I am present in all of those classes, not just physically, but in coordination with the teachers to manage the curricular load and adjustments and accommodations for the students, not only on my caseload, but on my colleagues, my other special education colleagues, for the children that are in certain classes. And then logistically, I'm in building 6, which is science and maths. So I support chemistry, I support human geography, I support all high school mathematics from algebra to calculus, biology, chemistry, again, all of the different sciences I support. And at my school, you have 6 class periods of an hour, and students are expected to go from English to history to science to maths, etc.
Hmm.
And to manage that load and to switch very quickly, they have a 5 minute period to get from one class to another. And because we are only 6 classes and 4 of them are mandatory, then they might have two that they want to be in, like band or farm or something like that.
Yeah.
My school is one of 2 campuses in America's second largest school district, Los Angeles, that has a farm, an actual working farm with animals and plants and everything. And is a very, very popular program. So that's the one class that brightens students, that they love it. And, even though they're, turning over manure or planting seeds or whatever, or they can pick up a rabbit and, co-regulate with the bunnies. Um, they they must manage this language load And by the time they get to the upper ends of high school, they're expected to operate everything that they've ever learned,
Mm,
right? And that goes not only for mathematics in terms of the things that you learned, basic division in the fourth grade, year four.
mm,
They're expected not only to know that basic facts, but they're expected to understand how it applies to trig ratios and field dynamics in calculus and these kinds of things. But they don't ever see everything whole. They don't see the whole of it ever in the curriculum. They see a little bit of part here in the fourth grade, then in year five, then in year six. And it's always so disjointed and there's no repetition. There's no building on it. There's no ability to see the whole of it ever until they turn 17 years old and
yeah,
they're in, advanced algebra and they're getting ready for calculus. So part of that exasperation on my part is, talking with my colleagues. If the children kind of see the whole of it ever, then how do we frame it? How do we contextualize it?
yeah.
Um, and so that's where the whole of it comes from as accommodation. And a very
Mm,
specific instance with a colleague in a geometry class where I've been chatting to him for like 5 years now about the whole of it. And so he actually brought the whole of it in, understanding that without this, the children would lose the context. They would be completely untethered from this lesson. And watching the light go on in his eyes, a brilliant educator, brilliant
mm,
mathematician, realizing I have to do this. Otherwise it can't work. That to me was like the spark that led to the flooding that I had in producing that whole series in a course of 3 mornings, and getting it ready. So, to that end, it's a common problem, but the educational establishment do not see it that way, right? And
no.
when I say things like, I won 4 championships in the Highland Games, I was a stone put champion, I was caber toss champion, I was hammer champion, and I got, really good at stone put because I did 500 turns a day for years, to
Mm,
where my muscles just knew where to line up and what to do, and it just became automatic. But we think about that in sport, right? How many times do you kick a football? How many times does the keeper,
mm,
practice to be, in the Premiership and stuff? But we don't apply that to mathematics. We don't apply that to history or, English or whatever. We just, okay, well, it's like mass appreciation. Would you like to hear about some, decimals? And, oh, I appreciate that. Okay, great, you get an A, and you move on. Um, and so we don't apply the same principles of how memory and muscle work. And so we just kind of go along with it. And
mm,
the educators, the teachers, they're very good. They're very bright. They love the thing that they love. They're single subject. You know, there's one teacher who just loves Shakespeare. And so,
mm,
and tragic fiction and all of this kind of stuff. And so in year nine, that's what students get. But what if they don't like it? Well, too
mm,
bad, because that's what the teacher's
yeah,
focusing. And in year 10, you're dealing with the Cold War, you're dealing with, Animal Farm and the Russian Revolution and all these kinds of dreary themes. Do students have voice in that? No. And not only are they dealing with it in English, they're dealing with it in history as well. And
yeah,
so the thing that I think most educational establishments don't understand is the ecology of the room. How do I feel when I think to myself, I have to go to history class? Oh, crap. Not again. Right.
yeah,
Or I have to, I know the whole month is about Shakespeare. Oh God. Why? Why?
mm,
Why can we not talk about Robert Burns, right? Why can we not sing Burns poems aloud and have fun and Kaylee and, adult beverages and stuff like that? Um, because there is no student voice. There is no voice of the entirety of the constituency in the classroom. It's teachers. Teachers are sovereign. And so I tried to, in this kind of the whole of it as accommodation, to say, this is the ecology as it applies to the body. This is how it impacts me as I walk into the room.
mm,
This is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm feeling. This is where I'm hiding.
yeah,
This is the emotional impact of it. And so these are my scripts. that I've been assembling these for years in my head, and they finally just kind of flooded out at the same time. But these are for parents to have conversations with teachers and with schools and to say, you know, you have a large constituency of Gestalt processors that maybe will get the whole of it as accommodation if the teacher knows how to do it. But if
Hmm.
the teacher can figure that out, then they don't get properly educated. They
No.
don't have a proper environment, and they're being left behind.
Yeah. And I guess it's about that. One of the things you talked a lot about this week was that sort of manageability, that actually the system that we have now is not so much about the ecology of the classroom for the student, but really about the manageability for the the education system, not the other way round. And um, rather than children and young people being curious about Shakespeare and his life, they're needing to show that they understand it through compliance, that, through, science, which is fascinating, is the way in which it's taught doesn't sort of necessarily gain those reflective questions, that curiosity. It's about remembering all those facts without being able to sort of intrinsically, explicitly think about them first before and experience it. And I think that is massive for GLPs, for autistic or neurodivergent children, which encompasses all of the children alongside with kind of language differences as well, for sure.
Yes, that's a lot. It's a lot to manage. And
Yeah.
in my profession and in my place, I'm often called upon by my colleagues to say, this is now working, not just for the students with IEPs, but for anybody. And it's happened a few times, especially what we call algebra 2 or advanced algebra,
Mm,
where the curriculum assumes that the children have remembered everything up until that
yeah.
point and can operate it. And of course they cannot. And I think I've mentioned before, like the logarithm exercise and
Mm,
uh, the notice and wonder, which is a device in the curriculum. You look at a logarithm chart, what do you notice and what do you number? What do
yeah.
you know, and they look at a logarithm chart and have no idea what they're looking at. They
Yeah.
don't know the history of it. They don't know what it tried to solve. They don't know anything about it. And so then my colleague is asking me to kind of improv the context. And that's happened
Yeah.
again this week where there is a there is an exercise called the unit circle that is a bridge between geometry, advanced algebra, and into calculus, where we
Yeah.
operate, where we put trigonometry in motion. And they're presented with this circle, radius one, and all these different coordinate points and radians. And what do you notice and what do you wonder? I don't know. I don't know what this is, right? And so again, my job as improv, and I'm very very grateful that my speech therapy was actually occupational therapy, and it happened in improv theater. So I have that kind of backup. But if you think about my classroom, a lot of the kids are from the areas south of our border, right? So,
Mm,
in Mexico and Guatemala and Honduras and stuff, where there is legacy of Aztec and Maya and all of these different empires of the past that were very astronomical, right? And that they operated in a system mathematically that is not base 10 like England or America, but in base 60. And if you take this unit circle and you convert it to base 60, then you're dealing with whole numbers, not, you know, square root of 3/2, right? Or
yeah.
2 pi/3 or something like that. You're dealing with minutes and seconds. You're dealing very simply in terms of it's one turn around. So that's the quarter turn at 90 degrees. And, that's kind of a rhetorical device that I use, the quarter turn. Um, and so I bring that in about solar cycles and the shape of the moon and, the shape of the earth and all of these circles that are around us and how our ancestral past, my own, in the West
Mm,
Highlands on the Stones, you have these ways of interpreting the stars and the planets that just make more sense than base 10. Right. And so
Yeah.
having this kind of conversation about it, contextualizing this unit circle, what's it for? Now they have something to anchor it to. Now they see the whole of
Mm.
it. Now they can take it apart. And even children who are not themselves Gestalt processors can do this, right? And I've been doing this enough now that teachers are starting to notice, and administrators have witnessed it too, and are starting to ask questions like, okay, what is Dr. H doing? And so now I've been asked to conduct a kind of professional development on our usual Tuesday professional development days.
Mm.
And so I'm inviting my colleagues into that experience as students, not as learned faculty, but to come into my classroom and experience their design.
Hmm.
And I think it's going to be interesting because in my own teaching, because of who I am, I'm autistic, I'm a Gestalt processor. I have, all of these things that make me that. But that relational field, feeling how the classroom is situated, who's anxious, who's on the verge of panic, who has to pee, all these kinds of things you can kind of feel when you're attuned with your class. And I want them to begin to feel that. And so there is a device that is used here, the notice and wonder, or read and annotate. And so the children come in, first 5 minutes, open to this page, read and annotate, and answer a couple of questions. So I'm giving the teachers that exercise, but it makes assumptions that I know are not true, but professionally should be true. They have a 4 year degree, so they have to have some sense of geography in the world. They have to have some sense of history in the world. And so it's just a simple one page front and back. And on the front of it is a world map, right? And you can see the map and you can recognize it's the map of the world. However, it's a map from China. And all of the labels are in Chinese script, right? And on the back of it, it asks a very simple question. Locate these three locations on the map. Allo, Comrie, and Tishakneheren, written as such, right, in the Gaelic. And then it asks them, through complete sentences, to answer this question. What do these three locations have in common historically? And what do they have in common in recent times? And it's not that I'm trying to embarrass them, that they don't know where
Oh no.
Scotland and Cymru and the north of Ireland are, or what happened in the last few weeks that makes that significant. I want so then this segues into a conversation. How did that make you feel when you couldn't answer the question? Right? When you were working with a map and a language that was not your own, how did that make you feel? You're very smart, right? There's a history teacher, at least one history teacher in this room. There's at least one English teacher in this room. How did that make you feel to not know that? And then what did you do about it? Did you shut down? Did you get angry? Did you chat to a friend? Did you doom scroll on your mobile because you're a teacher? You're allowed to have your mobile, unlike students. Did you check out, like immediately start thinking about what you're planning for your lesson? Right? I want you to feel that. And so the technique is called self-regulation strategy development. It's something that I do very explicitly in front of students. And I narrate my internal state. Like when I see this Charles Mackay poem, I just, oh my God, I cannot believe he's Scottish. And it's dreary and it's horrible. And I can't believe they give this. I'm talking about my internal reaction to things. And so I'm going to help them to narrate this. And then we'll go through, a few kind of discussions and exercises.
Mm.
And then I'll explain why we are talking about this because across America, the whole educational landscape has changed. And it started before Trump, but it accelerated during Trump. And that is kind of, the extension of Thatcherism and Reaganism of depleting the public sphere. And so we're seeing more and more concentration in the public school of students with IEPs. So at my school, it's 1 in 5 students have an IEP.
Mm.
That is massive. That is
Yeah.
significant. And now with our new labor contract, they're acknowledging not only that this is the fact, but that it's going to get more dense. Right. So first was the last contract was, oh, okay, here, first bed teachers, you can have, this stipend and we'll make it pensionable. And now in this contract, they're acknowledging that the density of our caseloads are going to be exploding. And then they're just going to pay a fine because they know there's no more teachers coming. So that means there are going to be more students with IEPs in the general education classroom for teachers who've
Yeah.
not been prepared for that. So part of this is preparing them for that.
Yeah.
And so there's that discussion about what full inclusion means. And
Yeah.
the end of the special day program class, the segregated classroom for high schools is gone. There's not enough people
Mm.
with my credential. And so you're going to have to manage emotions, right? Those with emotional difficulties, emotional disabilities, autistic kiddos that aren't managing that ecology because it's everywhere. It's chaotic and they're shutting down. So I want to shut them down a bit, right? And bring them to an awareness that this is happening. And
Mm.
then there's a bit of guided practice, and then there's a bit of independent practice. And the independent practice is 5 algebra problems, right? College graduates are supposed to have taken a math class. And the majority of my colleagues probably took a math class at most like 10 years ago, probably farther back than that. And I want them to feel like the profession expects you to be able to do this because you have a degree, because you've taken the
Mm.
class. You're responsible for that information. So find the area of a triangle, find the volume of a rectangle, right?
You've already made me panic just thinking about it.
Right. And why can you not, Cathy, solve, for the area of a trapezoid? Right. A learned woman such as yourself should be able to do this, of course.
Yeah.
But that's what we're expecting in advanced algebra, that they can operate all this with no notice, with no warning, just here, go ahead and solve for
Mm.
y, right? Solve for the volume of a cylinder. No context, nothing. And it's not that I'm trying to embarrass anybody. It's not that I'm trying to make myself look good or whatever, because
Ah.
this is what I do every day. When the children didn't understand this, I have to reach into my script library
Yeah.
and bring out the volume of a trapezoid structure and, conical solids, and I'm expected to do that on the fly. It's not that I'm trying to prove myself. I want them to experience the feeling. That's all I
Yeah.
want to do. How do you feel when this comes at you, decontextualized, without warning, and now you're being asked to perform, and you're amongst your peers, and everybody's kind of looking around saying, okay, who's going to start? Which one are they going to start with? It's only 5 questions, right? The area of a triangle is easy. Why can't you do that? Okay, who knows how to do that? Like, what are your strategies? I want to know what's going on in your mind, because chances are, very strongly, this is what your students are experiencing. This is why they're not
Yeah.
connecting. This is why they're
Yeah.
not turning in homework. This isn't why they're not doing work in class. This is why they're checking out, Miss, can I go pee? Can I drink water? Um, and so can we begin with the whole of it, the ecology of the classroom, the relational landscape, and then we can do the algorithms.
And I think that that brings us to a very nice end today, Jamie, if that's okay.
Aye,
Because I
that's a
think
lot.
that's it. Yeah, it is a lot. And I think there's a lot for people who are listening to us today to really reflect on, and I guess the more you and I in our different professions that we think like that, and that actually not everybody does, but also it's that connection, that relational experience of whoever we're with, whether it be a student, a colleague, whatever. What how does that make them feel? And I think, as you said, in terms of how it's going to make possibly your colleagues feel, that we know that students on a day and children on a day-to-day basis experience that, and what does that do to their nervous system, what does that do to their their sense of self, their sense of, forget learning. I can't learn if I'm totally dysregulated because I'm overwhelmed. So
I think
yeah.
it also speaks to the question of those parents who say, well, my child never melts down at school, they always melt down at home.
Yeah. Oh my
Right. So they're
goodness.
holding it together and they're holding
Yeah.
it together. And then when they get home, it goes out. That's it. I've barely made it
Yeah.
home. I know exactly how that feels. And I share that with the students. Like, there are times when I'm not looking forward to the day because I know it's coming. I'm crying on the way to work. Or I've experienced a very bad sensory environment of a meeting and I'm crying on the way home. And this is why.
Mm, yeah. Gosh, I feel like that's another a whole nother area to talk about
Oh,
as well.
and we probably should have put a
Masking.
content warning. Right.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a total pleasure as usual, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
Yay. Look forward to seeing you as well. Always look forward to it.
Thank you. Bye.